The U.S. says a rocket which landed at an airbase in northern Iraq might have contained a chemical agent. The rocket hit Qayyara airbase south of the city of Mosul on Tuesday. U.S. officials say a sample has been sent to a laboratory to find out whether the rocket contained mustard gas. No troops were hurt or have displayed symptoms of exposure to the chemical agent. Washington blames the attack on Daesh terrorists. U.S. forces are working with Iraqis to strengthen the airbase ahead of a push to liberate Mosul from Daesh. The terrorists are accused of using chemical weapons in both Syria and Iraq. To discuss that further, we're now joined by Mr. Edward Corrigan, who is an international human rights lawyer, and he's joining us live now via Skype from Ontario. Mr. Corrigan, who do you think should shoulder the blame for terrorists getting their hands on these sorts of chemical weapons?
Well, there's been numerous reports that the Islamic terrorists, the Daesh terrorists in particular, have been receiving support from the Americans in getting chemical weapons. There was a WikiLeaks report saying that the Americans facilitated the transfer of sarin gas from Libya to the Daesh Islamic State terrorists in Syria itself. But what you have, it's actually mustard gas is sort of a fairly old technology. It was used largely in the First World War. Of course, it's very painful, very destructive, and a lot of people would argue that it's a prohibited weapon. And of course, the Americans they drew a line at one time saying that if any gas was used in an attack, that they were going to start bombing the government of Syria. So sure enough, the rebels initiated a gas attack, hoping that the Americans would blame the Syrian government, but at least Obama had the sense enough to back off from his first statement, which was rather foolish, because if you automatically are going to attack the Syrian government with a gas attack, you are going to get a gas attack, but for purposes of getting the Americans to attack the Syrian government, not the rebels. But this case, it clearly is the rebels that are in the Islamic group to attack American and Iraqi troops. This whole policy is quite strange. The Americans are attacking the Islamic State and Daesh in Iraq, and they're supporting a Shia-dominated government. But it's the reverse in Syria, where at least the CIA is supporting the Islamic rebels, and the Pentagon have been supporting the Kurds. And you've got all these different players, even different factions in the United States. And the only commonality, I think, is the destruction of both Iraq and Syria, which I think is really the major game player. That's the game. And I think Israel, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia and them want to punish Syria in particular for not bowing to its dictates with regard to the building a pipeline through Syria so they could supply gas to Europe, and that thereby at least provide competition or even an alternative to Russian gas, which Europe is very much dependent upon. But clearly Daesh they're desperate. They have used chemical weapons on numerous instances. It's been alleged by observers. It's even been confirmed by the Pentagon. And yet this is another incident where the Islamic State is in their desperation using chemical weapons against in a desperate attempt to oppose their radical Islamic agenda on the area and support a caliphate or some sort of a extreme Islamic State, which in fact in my view and most view of most scholars is not even Islamic. It's something quite different. It's an aberration. So here we have this attack going on. I would like to wait until we get final confirmation if it was in fact used, if it was mustard gas that was used, and of course this is should keep putting pressure on the Americans to eradicate Daesh and to eliminate their ability to produce any sort of chemical weapons. Last week, reportedly the Americans and coalition airplanes did destroy a factory that was suspected of producing chemical weapons. So they need to keep going on that and to get rid of this Islamic State group in Iraq, but they also need to have some sort of a consistent policy with regard to the whole region. And when you're pursuing one policy and attacking a group in Iraq, but at the same time supporting the same group in Syria, as I said, it's schizophrenic and it's crazy, and this needs to stop, and the Americans need to sit back and take an objective look, and then you need to put pressure on Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia in particular, to get them to stop funding the these groups, because they're getting tanks, they're getting, all sorts of high-tech weapons, and that's not happening by itself. ISIS has that ability, but it's being provided for by their supporters, and they're getting those weapons ultimately from the West, and particularly from the United States and Britain.
Okay, Mr. Corrigan, we'll leave there at that, but of course, as always, we do sincerely appreciate you taking your time out to speak to us here at Press TV.